Hello and welcome. Today we're going to dive into a really profound story from the Quran. It's a story that reveals something, something quite dangerous in our spiritual lives. What happens when our obedience to God becomes a negotiation, and how the heart, through its own resistance, can actually begin to harden.
A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. I seek refuge in Allah from the accursed Satan.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful.
And just so you know, the beautiful insights that we're about to explore together were compiled by Mir Ali Shah for the Living the Wisdom of the Quran podcast.
So let's start with a question, a pretty deep one actually. How can obedience harden the heart? I mean, think about it. It's a total paradox, right? We think of obedience as this beautiful thing that's supposed to soften us, to bring us closer to the divine. But what happens when we approach it without the right heart? What happens when our obedience turns into an argument?
Well, to get to the bottom of this, we're going to turn to a really powerful story in the second chapter of the Quran, Sūrah al-Baqarah. It's a story of Prophet Musa, that's Moses, and a command given to his people that was, on the surface, incredibly simple.
The command is perfectly clear, perfectly direct. Slaughter a cow. But just look at the immediate response. It's not a question for help or for clarity, it's an accusation. Do you take us in mockery? Right there, in that first moment, you can feel the wounded pride. The ego is already up in arms, already on the defensive.
And so the negotiation begins. Instead of just finding a cow and getting on with it, they ask for specifications. They introduce a delay. The answer they get is still pretty simple. Find a middle-aged cow. Musa even urges them, so do what you were commanded.
But do they do it? Nope. They come back again. This time, they want to know about its color. And with every question, another layer of specificity gets added. Now it has to be a bright, pleasing yellow. You see what's happening? It's they who are making this command difficult, not God. And then, a third time, they return, and this time their excuse is, cows seem alike to us. Now you have to ask yourself, is this genuine confusion, or is this a shield? Is this a way to put off that final act of just surrendering? This is really the peak of their resistance, and it's all disguised as a search for truth. Finally, the description becomes unbelievably specific. It has to be a cow that hasn't been used for work, one that's perfectly sound without a single blemish, and only then do they say, now you've brought the truth. As if the truth wasn't right there in that very first simple command.
And this next verse, wow. This is the psychological key to the entire event. So they slaughtered it, though they almost did not. That one little phrase reveals everything. It tells us about the huge internal battle, the deep, profound reluctance. Yeah, they performed the action in the end, but their hearts were barely in it.
So, what are we supposed to take away from all this? Well, like so much of the Quran, this story has layers. There's an outer, more literal meaning, and then there's a deeper, symbolic one that speaks right to the state of our own hearts. On the outer level, the Zahir, the lesson is pretty straightforward. Their constant questioning turned something easy into something incredibly hard. They kept putting off submission. But the inner meaning, the batin, this is where it gets really personal for every single one of us. On this level, the cow isn't just a cow. It's a symbol for our own stubborn ego, our nafs. That part of us that's slow and heavy and resistant. And the questions? They're not for clarity. They're the ego's defense mechanisms to avoid the slaughter, to avoid the act of surrender.
The great spiritual masters of the Islamic tradition looked at this story and they saw a perfect mirror for the soul, and they've left us with some profound insights into this inner struggle we all face.
Al-Qushayri, for example, saw the cow as a direct symbol for the self. So, to slaughter the cow is to surrender our own willfulness, our need for control, to the divine will. And the knife, in this case? Well, that's the divine command that's asking us to give up a piece of that self.
And Rumi just gets right to the heart of our motives, doesn't he? He says the questions don't come from a lack of knowing, they come from fear. A clear command is actually threatening to the ego's independence. And when our love for the commander is weak, our mind becomes an excuse factory.
Then there's this really serious warning from Ghazali. He says that using the search for more knowledge just to avoid doing what you're supposed to do, well, that's actually a thicker veil, a bigger barrier than simple ignorance. Their problem wasn't a lack of information, it was a lack of presence, a lack of the will to just act.
So what's the big deal? What's the real spiritual cost of all this negotiation, this constant delaying and resisting? Well, the Quran gives us a diagnosis that is, frankly, chilling.
Then your heart's hardened after that. That's the direct result. The heart didn't just become disobedient. It became calcified. It lost its softness, its ability to feel, its capacity to receive mercy and guidance, like stones, or maybe even harder.
The specific Arabic word for this is qaswa. And what's so important to understand is that it's a process. This kind of hardness isn't something that happens overnight. It's an accumulation. Every time we delay obedience, every time we negotiate with a clear command, we add another layer until the heart just becomes impenetrable.
And what's fascinating is this isn't just some ancient spiritual concept. Modern psychology actually has terms for this, like decision avoidance or moral procrastination. It's this act of overanalyzing it as a subconscious way to avoid making a difficult choice. It's just resistance dressed up as reason.
Okay, so let's bring this all home. How does this ancient story speak to us, right here, right now, as seekers on a spiritual path? It's really an invitation to look inward and ask ourselves some pretty tough questions.
So let's just use this as a moment for reflection. O seeker, really notice those times when you ask for more clarity, for just one more sign, when what you're truly afraid of is the surrender that's being asked of you. God's commands are usually not that complicated. What makes them obscure is our own self that just wants to be in control. If an act of obedience feels heavy and burdensome, maybe don't ask about the law. Ask where your heart has gone. Let's try to slaughter that cow, that inner resistance, before it grows too large to move.
And we'll end with this munajat, this beautiful, intimate prayer. O Commander whose mercy is light, free us from the questions that delay love. Let us obey while the heart is still soft, before it learns the language of stone. Ameen.